So what do you mean when you say you're a markets person, but you're an anti-capitalist?
So I think that markets have existed before capitalism. I think we have enough evidence of that going back even through feudalism and before it in the anthropological record. And markets have often existed at the intersection of societies. And I bring up David Graeber all the time because he was an incredible influence on me in my understanding. And in Debt, the first 5,000 years, he looks at a lot of societies and he's like, the areas in which the markets occurred in his descriptions were often at the edges. So within the societies, maybe they didn't even have money, right? But they had all of these, they had built-in trust, right? Like in a society where you know people, where you know your community, and you have whatever guidelines or rules that your community follows, your society follows, you may not need a market because your trust is how you make your decisions on, whether you like give dowry, like a bride dowry, like if you give, somebody's going to get married, right? There's all sorts of customs around like how resources are divvied up and shared. But in the market, like haggling, I think was the word that he said. Its origin was not like the nicest origin. It was something like you would use with the stranger, like you would kind of like rip them off, kind of thing. So I think that markets exist where trust is low, which kind of goes back to like where Bitcoin is like don't trust verify kind of thing, like, or it's like it's trustless, like. There's built-in mechanisms, so you don't have to necessarily trust the other person that you're exchanging with. And I think in those areas, markets will have to exist, will always come up spontaneously because there's no like human trust between strangers necessarily. So in that sense, I think markets naturally exist, and there's plenty of evidence that markets have naturally existed. And there's always been rules in markets too, like during feudal times, like they had rules against monopolies, right? So there have been rules, or what we might call regulations, but it depends on who's enforcing them, right? We have regulations now enforced by the state. So then we have state capitalism, and we have now finance capitalism. We started with industrial capitalism, where we were manufacturing everything in the United States, and there was jobs. And at that time, the classical economists, it was popular then to think that, capitalism is going to naturally progress towards socialism because it's cheaper for the employers to have the state provide these services to their workers. And they need workers to at least be healthy and fed and clothed and housed, right? So they can come and produce the manufactured goods. But then the society in the United States and globally have transitioned to finance capitalism. So our economy is now very much finance based, right? It's like all done with the banks, with Wall Street, and now there's like no incentive really to take care of people because you can make money off of rent seeking. So like Michael Hudson, he's an economist who's actually sort of more like a progressive type economist. He wrote this amazing book called Super Imperialism that talks about like how we got off of the gold standard and how the treasuries were used basically to fund our deficit spending and of course wars. So he like looks at Wall Street and he's like, oh yeah, like this is basically like where the central planning is now in the United States. And he says that this is a rentier economy. And I agree with him. Like in finance capitalism, you're going to make money off of interest, right? You're not really making money off of tangible goods. So this has led to, I think, the situation that we're in where people don't really matter so much so long as they keep certain aspects of the economy going. And that I think is very troubling because in order for this particular type of capitalism to work, like with neoliberalism, you really need the state involved. And so there's a symbiotic, parasitic relationship here where the state and, let's say, the banking industry, but also like other corporations like fossil fuel industry, are closely intertwined to make things favorable for finance. And for example, when you look at how the money ends up going towards the fossil fuel industry, there's all sorts of really bad incentives that the government enforces with tax breaks and subsidies that makes it like a pipeline for funds and loans to be from banks to go towards the fossil fuel industry. So like issues that we have with like new coal plants coming online are because because you literally can imagine like pipes pushing the money in a particular direction, like there's like paths that have been built in because of the government. So there's so many things that are happening in this particular system that is destructive, not just like people losing their homes and never getting a home back, or banks stealing their property from them, but also like with fossil fuels, the fact that we have like $5.1 trillion worth of subsidies every year for the fossil fuel industry. So that to me
really
does globally, like it's like 5 trillion every year. So we have a really screwed up system. And you can call it capitalism, you can call it crony capitalism, call it whatever you want. The existing actual system that we live in is totally broken.